The beeping of the heart monitor was the only rhythm keeping me upright. Every pulse echoed through me like a reminder of how many years had slipped quietly through my fingers. 11 years of caregiving compressed the world into small circles. Pill bottles, warm washcloths, whispered encouragement, the soft drag of wheelchair wheels over worn hardwood. I stood beside my mother's hospital bed, the air thick with antiseptic and the faint lemon scent of the disinfectant wipes I always carried. Her breathing was shallow that morning, each exhale trembling. A ribbon of early sunlight pushed its way through the blinds, landing across her hospital bracelet. Margaret Collins. The tag looked too heavy on her frail wrist. I reached out to brush her forehead. "Mom, I'm here. You can rest." Her eyes fluttered, unfocused, but they found my voice. They always found my voice. Down the hallway, a metal cart clattered, jolting her. I squeezed her hand, grounding her. My fingers were numb from exhaustion, but routine had become muscle memory. The world could fall apart. I'd still know exactly when to adjust her pillow, or when her breathing shifted from discomfort to distress. I lived in these micro-sensations. The only language she and I shared after the stroke stole her words. A shadow moved at the doorway. Nurse Diana Ruiz stepped inside. She had the steady posture of someone who'd survived too many midnight codes, the kind of woman who read rooms the way others read charts. Her dark hair was tied in a low knot, stray strands escaping as if resisting order. She offered me a nod, the soft kind reserved for caregivers who live in the hospital as much as their own homes. "Ashley," she said quietly, "can we talk for a minute?" I tried to smile, even though my skin felt stretched thin. If this is about the consent forms, it's not the forms. Her tone wasn't clinical. It was loaded. Something shifted in the air, subtle but undeniable. She stepped closer, pretending to check Mom's vitals. Her hand grazed my arm, deliberate. Then she leaned in. "Ashley," she whispered, so soft I barely felt it. "Call the police. Now." My entire body froze. "What?" My voice cracked, too loud. "What are you talking about?" Diana kept her gaze on the monitor as if nothing had passed between us. But her voice, her whisper, slid back toward me like a warning carried through smoke. "Not here." My heartbeat echoed against my ribs like a trapped thing. "I don't understand." Her jaw tightened. "You will." She glanced at the hallway as if expecting someone to appear. No one did. The hospital corridor hummed with the usual noises: monitors, overhead announcements, tired families. Nothing abnormal, nothing dangerous. But something was wrong. Very wrong. She lowered her voice again. "There are signs on your mother's body that didn't come from immobility, or age, or stroke complications." I blinked, stunned. "Signs? What signs?" Diana swallowed hard. Bruising patterns, wrist marks, tenderness in areas that shouldn't be tender, repeated micro tears in the skin. Someone has been handling her roughly. The room tilted, just a little. "No," I whispered. "No. I'm with her almost every minute." "Almost," Diana repeated gently. "But not always." The air went cold. My mind flashed through every nurse aide, every home caregiver, every respite worker I'd hired over the past months so I could sleep more than 3 hours at a time or take a shower without rushing. Faces blurred together. Polite, efficient, smiling. Helpful. Or so I thought. Diana moved to the doorway again, her posture straightening. "Your mother is safe for now. But Ashley." Her eyes locked onto mine. "Someone has been hurting her. Intentionally."
It felt like someone had plunged a fist deep into my chest. My lungs forgot how to work. My legs almost buckled. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. I would have known." "You're exhausted," she said gently.
You've been carrying this alone for years. Sometimes, exhaustion creates blind spots. Her words landed with surgical precision, painful but true. My hands were shaking. Anger, guilt, shock, all of it tangled and pulled tight around my throat. Diana leaned in again, the scent of lavender soap brushing the air between us. "Call the police," she repeated. "Do it before whoever did this comes back." I looked at my mother, her fragile frame, her arms tucked against her chest, her breathing faint but steady. The bruising, the tenderness, the things I chalked up to aging or fragility, the signs I should have seen. My stomach twisted with a guilt so sharp I couldn't inhale without pain. I whispered, "Mom, I'm so sorry." And for the first time in years, her fingers twitched around mine. Tiny, weak, but unmistakable. Like she was answering. Like she was asking. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My thumb hovered over 911. My entire body trembled. 11 years of caring. 11 years of sacrifice. 11 years of protecting her, only to find I hadn't protected her at all. My vision blurred. Diana's voice steadied me. "Do it, Ashley." And in that moment, raw, trembling, terrified, I pressed the call button. The line clicked. 911, what's your emergency? Everything in my life split open. I think my mother is being abused." The words tasted like blood and truth. Silence curled around me, thick and final. This wasn't the kind of emergency I'd trained for, or the kind I'd handled as a social worker. This was mine. This was personal. This was betrayal in the ugliest form. On the other side of the glass, the hospital hallway kept moving. Nurses, families, machines. Life continuing as if mine hadn't just cracked apart. Diana rested a steady hand on my shoulder, the quiet strength of someone who'd seen too many families break and too few rebuild. "We're with you," she murmured. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time in 11 years, I felt a sliver of that truth. But beneath it all, beneath the rising storm inside me, one certainty hit harder than any fear. Whoever hurt my mother picked the wrong daughter. Here is part 2, rewritten cleanly in English, maintaining your tonal preferences. More action, less dialogue, poetic undercurrent, emotionally sharp, grounded, decisive. The morning after calling 911, I stood alone in my kitchen, if you could still call it a kitchen. It felt more like a supply station. Pill organizers lined up like soldiers, gloves stacked beside antiseptic wipes. A whiteboard covered in medication times, feeding logs, subtle reminders to breathe, hydrate, don't break. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. I hadn't taken a sip. My eyes drifted to the empty wheelchair leaned against the far wall. For 11 years, the soft squeak of its wheels had been the soundtrack of my life. Now, in my mother's absence, the silence felt hostile. I touched the wheelchair's armrest. The metal was cold, sharp enough to jolt something old and aching inside my chest. I had built my life around this chair, around the woman who needed it, around the promise that she'd never be alone. But now she was lying in a hospital bed, bruised, hurting, and worse, hurt by someone else. I closed my eyes and felt the air leave me in one long, crushed breath. Back at the hospital, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I pushed through the doors.
the scent of disinfectant wrapped around me like a memory I didn't want. I walked fast, too fast. My shoes squeaked against polished tiles as if accusing me, "You weren't there." Mom's room was quiet except for the gentle rise and fall of the heart monitor. I slipped inside, moving like someone bracing for an aftershock. She lay small beneath the hospital blankets, smaller than yesterday, smaller than her years. I didn't sit. I leaned forward, hovering over her like a shelter that couldn't shield enough. My hands hovered too, afraid to touch her.
Afraid to find more pain. Eventually, I lifted her arm. A breath locked in my throat. The bruising wasn't random. It wasn't from age or weakness. It wasn't from stroke spasms. It followed patterns, shadows of fingers, crescents of pressure, the kind of harm that leaves fingerprints even when the attacker tries to hide them. Mom flinched at the contact. Her body, once so strong, curled in a quiet, involuntary defense. I felt the sting behind my eyes, but no tears fell. There was no room for tears, only a rising, steady flame. I kissed her knuckles, dry, trembling, endlessly familiar, and whispered an apology she couldn't understand but somehow always felt. In the hallway, Nurse Diana Ruiz stood with her hands tucked into her scrub pockets, shoulders squared, gaze already on me the moment I emerged. She didn't speak. She simply tilted her head toward the end of the corridor. I followed her into a supply room. The door shut with a soft click, but it sounded final, like the lid closing on something long buried. Instead of talking, Diana pulled out a small tablet, tapped twice, and brought up the hospital's hallway footage. Her fingers scrolled, then stopped. Emma Powers appeared on screen, the caregiver I'd hired 3 months ago. Neat ponytail, professional posture, efficient movements. The kind of woman you'd trust with a fragile life because she made fragility look manageable. In the footage, Emma pushed my mother's wheelchair into her room. Only she didn't push, she shoved. The jolt made Mom's head snap forward, her body folding like paper in a rush of motion. My stomach clenched as if someone had punched me from the inside. Diana zoomed in. Emma grabbed Mom's wrist, hard, too hard. The skin rippled under the pressure of her fingers. Mom's face tightened in pain, a quiet plea locked behind her unresponsive muscles. My breath stuttered. Diana didn't comfort me with words. She didn't need to. The footage was a scalpel slicing through every illusion I had left. I stepped back, hand gripping the metal shelf behind me so tightly that pain shot up my arm. It grounded me. Just enough to stay upright. When the video ended, Diana locked the screen and looked at me, steady, unflinching. Her silence said it all. This happened. And it didn't happen just once. I pressed both hands to my face and inhaled until my lungs hurt. Then I lowered them and nodded. She nodded back. Warriors don't need speeches, just truth. When I got home that afternoon, the house felt wrong. Too clean, too quiet, too organized. Abuse hides well in clean places. It thrives in order, in routine, in the blind spots carved by exhaustion. I tore through the caregiver's workspace. Drawers slammed open, cushions flipped, boxes dumped. Each movement sharp, precise, fueled by a rage deeper than any I'd felt in my life. In the bottom drawer of the hall cabinet, I found it, a blister pack of pain medication, 3 pills missing in a pattern that didn't match the dosage schedule. Then a pair of gloves shoved deep into a tote bag, one fingertip smeared with a brownish streak. My stomach turned. I pressed the glove under bright kitchen light. Not dirt, not food, not rust. Blood. My mother's blood. From skin too thin, too fragile, too bruised. I placed the glove on the table, carefully, like evidence, like betrayal made tangible. I straightened, facing the hallway mirror. The woman in the reflection didn't look like a caregiver. She looked like someone standing in the doorway between grief and fury, between collapse and clarity. I lifted my chin. This wasn't my failure. This was someone else's cruelty, and I was done hiding from the truth of it. 2 hours later, police lights splashed blue across my living room walls. Officers entered with quiet steps, their flashlights slicing through the house as they cataloged the fragile, awful pieces of what I'd uncovered. While they documented every bruise, every pill, every glove, every shadow of evidence, I stood with my hands clasped tightly in front of me. My heartbeat was steady now, too steady. The kind of calm that follows a storm you've stopped trying to outrun. An officer paused beside me, his notepad filled. "You did the right thing," he said. I didn't answer. Regards felt too small, too late. When they left, the house sank into silence again. But this silence felt different, new, sharper. It wasn't the silence of denial. It was the silence before rebuilding. I walked to my mother's empty bedroom, the blankets neatly folded by habit. I touched the edge of her pillow, letting my fingers sink into the fabric. My body bowed slightly, not breaking, but bracing. "Mom," I whispered under my breath, "I'm here." And this time, for the first time in 11 years, I wasn't just caring, I was fighting. The hospital room felt different the next morning. Not colder, sharper, as if every corner had grown eyes. I walked in with my tote bag slung over my shoulder, footsteps soft on the linoleum. My mother slept with her head turned slightly toward the window, her breathing thin but steady. I brushed her hair back with gentle fingers, easing a strand away from her cheek. She relaxed under the touch. Her body recognized me even when her mind couldn't. A tray clattered in the hallway. Something metallic scraped the floor. I felt myself tense without meaning to, the way people do after they've learned to anticipate pain. A pair of officers arrived outside the door. Not the uniformed ones from last night. These wore plain clothes, quiet but watchful, badges clipped to belts instead of displayed on chests. Detective Monroe introduced herself with a nod. No small talk, no pity, just purpose, the kind I recognized. She stepped past me, leaning over Mother's bruises with practiced precision. She touched nothing, just observed. Her breath tightened when she saw the mark on Mother's clavicle, a bruise shaped too perfectly like a thumbprint. Her eyes flicked up, finding mine. She didn't say a word, but the conclusion was unmistakable. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't accident. This was assault. She motioned toward the hallway, and I followed her into the corridor, the air thick with disinfectant and the distant murmur of nurses. On the wall, a clock ticked, too loud, too slow. Monroe opened a small black case and pulled out a document folder. No commentary, no judgment, just facts, laid out in crisp lines and photographs. Images of other victims, other reports, other complaints, all pointing to the same caregiver agency, and to one name that now pulsed hot under my skin: Emma Powers. I felt the breath leave me in one jagged rush. Monroe placed the last photo face up, a close-up of my mother's wrist. Identical fingerprint pattern to another elderly woman's injury. Two strangers, same bruises, same pressure points, same cruelty. The detective didn't ask if it was Emma. She didn't have to. She simply slid a small form toward me, a formal report acknowledgement. My hand hovered over the signature line. For a second, I saw every night I had carried my mother from living room to bedroom, her weight against my chest like a fading heartbeat. Every morning I had fed her oatmeal, talked to her even when she couldn't respond. Every shower, every gentle lift, every whispered story meant to bring her comfort in the darkness she lived inside. Then I saw the footage. Emma's grip, the shove, the scowl. My pen hit the paper hard. Ink scratched across the line, fierce, final. I handed the form back. Monroe tucked it into her folder, nodded once, and disappeared down the hall with long, confident strides. When I returned to the room, Nurse Diana was adjusting my mother's blanket. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her movements were slow, deliberate, full of a respect that hurt to watch after what Mom had endured. I stood at the foot of the bed, breathing in the steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor. Not reassuring, not frightening, just a reminder that she was still here. That she'd survived something I hadn't even noticed happening under my own roof. Diana stepped aside, giving me space. She left without turning her back to me, a gesture of solidarity more comforting than any sentence she could have spoken. I sat beside my mother and lifted her hand, my thumb brushing the thin skin over her veins. Her fingers twitched, that tiny reflex that always felt like her soul reaching for mine. "You're safe now," I murmured. "You're safe." Her eyelids fluttered, as though she heard every unspoken word. That afternoon, I returned home to collect the rest of my mother's belongings. As I unfolded her nightgown from the laundry basket, something slipped out of the fabric and fell to the floor with a soft tap. A small piece of plastic. Rectangular, black, almost invisible against the tile. A camera. My stomach clenched. I lifted it with trembling fingers, turned it over. A tiny SD card was still inside, hidden so deeply in the seams of the nightgown I almost missed it. A second camera rested in the seam of her wheelchair cushion, wired in, disguised by padding. A third was taped under the bedside table, positioned to catch anyone leaning over her. My hands shook, breath catching. Mother hadn't installed cameras. I hadn't installed cameras. There was only one conclusion. Someone had planted them to watch her. I dropped the SD cards onto the counter and stepped back. The room spun gently, the way it does when the truth becomes too heavy for the air to hold. I pressed both hands into the counter's edge, grounding myself as a wave of nausea rolled through. Then footsteps sounded behind me, heavy, familiar. Brian. He stepped inside without knocking, eyes scanning the mess I'd made. Clothes on the floor, cabinets left open, evidence bags. The scattered remains of a life torn apart. He took one look at the cameras and scoffed. Great. I hadn't even opened my mouth and he was already dismissing me. His expression tightened into something between accusation and superiority. He circled the kitchen once, arms folded. "You're losing it, Ash." I didn't respond. Words were useless with someone who only heard what he wanted. He moved closer, leaning over the counter as if he owned the place. "She's hurt because you're too obsessed with doing everything yourself," he said. "This is your fault. You should have asked for help." The flame inside me rose so fast, I had to step back just to keep from breaking something. I lifted the cameras and held them between us, silent, undeniable. He flinched, but still shook his head. "This is nothing," he said. But I could see the crack form in his confidence, thin as a hairline fracture but real. "No," I finally said. "It's everything." The footage would expose Emma. The bruises would confirm it. The report would officially open the case. And Brian's little speech? It was nothing but the sound of a guilty man avoiding his own reflection. I pushed past him, cameras clutched tight in my fists. He called after me, something sharp, something petty, but his words dissolved in the air as I walked out the door. I didn't need to fight him. I had something stronger than his blame. I had the truth. Back at the hospital, I handed the cameras to Detective Monroe. She didn't smile. She didn't gasp. She simply nodded with grim approval, as if she'd known evidence like this would surface all along. She sealed everything in evidence bags, labeled them, slid them into her case. Her final gesture before leaving was a small tap of her knuckles on my shoulder. Not comfort, recognition. A silent message. This is where the real battle begins. And as she walked away, I stood in the hallway with my hands in fists, spine straight, breath steady. For the first time in 11 years, I wasn't just caring for my mother. I was defending her, and I wasn't stopping. The next morning arrived like a warning rather than a sunrise. Light sliced through the blinds in narrow stripes, sharp as blades. I moved through the hospital corridors with a calm that didn't match the storm building inside me. Mom's new room was guarded, 2 officers stationed outside, clipboards ready, eyes alert. I stepped past them with the practiced authority of someone who'd spent years navigating systems meant to break people stronger than me. Inside, Mom rested. Her breathing steadied. The bruises were still there, stark against her skin, but the fear in her muscles had softened. I adjusted her blanket, smoothed the edge with slow, protective strokes, and took a long breath. She wasn't safe yet, but she was safer than she'd been in months. I placed her hospital bracelet, twisted from the ambulance ride, on the table. A symbol of survival. A symbol of what I was fighting for. By noon, the hospital turned into a battlefield of clipboards, whispers, and converging footsteps. Investigators arrived. Administrators arrived. And somewhere down the hall, I caught a glimpse of someone leaving quickly, Emma's supervisor. Cowardice has a certain smell to it. Stale aftershave and panic. I didn't chase her. Not yet. Detective Monroe met me outside the ICU doors. She held the evidence folder against her chest like a shield and motioned for me to walk with her. We didn't speak as we moved. We didn't need to. Every step down that hallway was a declaration. She led me to a quiet consultation room. Inside, a projector hummed, clicking to life as she inserted the SD card. The first clip flickered onto the wall. There was my living room. My mother in her chair, the afternoon light falling across her blanket. Then Emma walked in. Her movements weren't careless, they were practiced cruelty. She yanked the chair backward until the front wheels left the ground. Mom's head jolted. A small cry escaped her, a sound I'd never heard before, a sound she'd hidden from me all those months. My chest tightened. Another clip. Emma slapping Mom's leg when it spasmed. Shouting something mute without audio but clear in her expression. A hand raised. A shove. A twist of the wrist. Mom didn't fight back. Couldn't. Just curled into herself, shrinking as if her body tried to become small enough to disappear. My nails dug into my palms until crescent moons of pain bloomed. Monroe paused the video and looked at me. But I didn't look back. I couldn't break eye contact with the screen, not until the truth finished speaking. Another clip. Nighttime. My mother alone. Emma forcing pills into her mouth, pinching her jaw to make her swallow faster. My breath caught. Heat rose behind my eyes. Every instinct screamed for action, for violence, but my body stayed still, rigid, grounded by pure, controlled fury. Monroe shut off the projector. Silence flooded the room, thick and hot. My pulse pounded in my ears. When I finally spoke, my voice was almost unrecognizable. Arrest her. Monroe nodded once. We will. But the universe doesn't let truth rise without giving darkness one last chance to fight back. When I left the consultation room, Brian was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed, jaw clenched, face twisted in a performative anger he didn't even earn. He walked toward me with heavy steps, like a man preparing to shift blame rather than carry it. Ashley, he started. I didn't stop walking. He cut in front of me. You let this happen. I froze. Not because I believed him, but because the audacity of his cowardice hollowed something inside me for a moment. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. This is what happens when you hoard control. If you just asked for help. I didn't shout, didn't break, didn't give him the spectacle he wanted. I simply lifted my phone and opened the photo gallery. Images flashed in rapid order. Mom's bruises, the glove, the stolen medication, a still frame from the footage, a timestamp, another. I held the screen between us, a mirror he didn't want. Ryan's eyes flickered, the moment of truth hitting him with perfect precision. His breath stuttered. Color drained from his cheeks, but his ego didn't let him crumble. It forced him to pivot. "This doesn't prove you've been a good caregiver," he snapped. I stepped closer. Close enough to smell the faint citrus cologne he used to hide sweat when he lied. "You left," I said quietly. "I stayed." The words hit him harder than any scream could. His jaw worked, searching for a comeback, a shield, an excuse. None came. I walked past him. He didn't follow. Back in Mom's room, a nurse adjusted her pillow while humming a soft tune, a balm in a world that felt sharpened to blades. I checked her IV, straightened her sheets, wiped a smudge from her cheek. These were small acts, but they were holy. Acts of love sharpened by war. The intercom crackled overhead. A nurse called for security to the main entrance. My muscles tightened. Instinct pulled me to the door. I peeked into the hallway. 2 security guards escorted someone through the lobby. A woman. Tall, dark hair pulled tight, hands cuffed in front of her. Emma. Her face was expressionless, flat and cold, like she believed she was smarter than everyone in this building. Even handcuffed, she held herself with an arrogance that made bile rise in my throat. As she walked past my hallway, her gaze swept left, casual, uninterested, until it found me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, time didn't move. The corners of her mouth twitched. Not a smile, something darker. A smirk of recognition. A silent message. I got away with it for months. You didn't see me. A chill rolled down my spine, but I didn't look away. Neither did she. The guards nudged her forward, and she finally broke eye contact. As soon as she turned the corner, I exhaled, a deep release I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I went back into Mom's room and closed the door softly. Not to shut out fear, but to shut out the past. An hour later, I walked into the hospital courtyard, the late afternoon breeze carrying the scent of pine and asphalt. I needed air. I needed space wide enough to contain the fire building inside me. A woman sat on a stone bench, curly hair, warm scarf, clipboard on her lap. "Ashley Collins?" she asked softly. I nodded. "I'm from Family Protective Services. I've been reviewing the initial reports." She didn't offer condolences, didn't soften her voice. She spoke with quiet respect, the kind reserved for survivors rather than victims. She handed me a folder labeled Guardianship Review, Collins, Margaret. My throat tightened. "You'll be evaluated," she said. "Not because you're suspected, but because the system requires it." I accepted the folder. It felt heavier than it should. Maybe because it represented something I'd never questioned. My right to protect my mother. The woman continued. "This is standard. We need to ensure she stays under the care of someone who understands her needs." In the reflection of the folder's plastic cover, I saw my own face, haunted, exhausted, but unmistakably determined. "I do," I murmured. She nodded. "Then you'll be fine." Before she left, she said one last thing. Not a warning, a recognition. "You were her shield," she said. "Now the system will be yours." By evening, I sat beside Mom again. The sky outside her window had turned indigo, streaked with the last pale gold of sunset. Machines hummed their mechanical lullaby. I took her hand. No cameras, no fear. No silence hiding bruises. Just her palm against mine, warm and familiar. I leaned back in the chair and let myself breathe. slow, controlled, steady breaths that eased the ache in my ribs. For the first time since discovering the abuse, I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, not triumph. Resolve. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that grows teeth. Because what happened wasn't an accident. It wasn't mismanagement. It wasn't a mistake. It was violence. And violence would be met with more than grief or anger. It would be met with justice. I looked down at my mother, my fragile, stubborn, gentle mother, and felt the future straighten itself inside me. Tomorrow the investigation would expand. Tomorrow the hearings would begin. Tomorrow Brian would try again. Tomorrow Emma would face court. Tomorrow the truth would rise higher. But tonight? Tonight we rested. I kissed her forehead, smoothing her hair one more time. "You're safe," I whispered. "And I'm not done." Outside, a wind moved through the pines, low, steady, commanding. A promise disguised as breath. The fight was no longer beginning. It was underway. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood. Heavy, sober air, thick with the weight of other people's worst days. I climbed the stone steps with my file pressed tight against my chest, each breath anchored by the steady pull of my mother's hospital bracelet, looped around my wrist like a quiet promise. Security scanned my bag. The metal detector buzzed as my keys clinked in the tray. A bailiff waved me through with bored efficiency, but his eyes softened when he noticed the hospital badge clipped to my coat. Inside the courtroom, everything felt too bright. Fluorescent light bounced off the varnished benches and the brass fittings around the doors. The walls were lined with people, attorneys shuffling papers, officers murmuring in low tones, strangers waiting for their own cases to be called. I took my seat behind the plaintiff's table. My knees brushed the underside of the wooden bench, but they didn't shake. I laced my fingers together on the table and stared at the grain in the wood until my heart slowed from a gallop to a controlled march. Across the aisle, Emma sat beside her attorney. She wore a pale blouse and a cardigan the color of soft stone. Her hair was styled neatly, makeup understated. No uniform, no badge. Nothing to indicate the hands that had hurt my mother. She sat with her shoulders relaxed, back straight, like she believed she still had control. Her eyes grazed over me once, flat, dismissive, like I was an inconvenience rather than the reason she was here. I held her gaze until she blinked. Behind me, a shuffle signaled another arrival. Brian slid onto the bench in the row behind mine. His suit looked new, his tie was crooked. He held himself like a man preparing to audition for Concerned Son in front of an audience. He didn't sit beside me. He didn't greet me. He sat just far enough away to feel separate, just close enough to be seen. A clerk called the case. The room rustled into a controlled stillness. Judge Lisa Nguyen entered, robes moving like quiet authority. Her expression was calm, reserved, not cold, measured. A woman who'd seen too much and allowed none of it to cloud her judgment. We rose, sat. The case title echoed through the room. State versus Emma Powers. My mother's name followed. For a moment, I closed my eyes and saw her face, soft, lined, tired, brave. Then I opened them and locked onto the judge. This wasn't about my fear. This was about her safety. The prosecution began. Hidden cameras, medical reports, nurse notes, security logs, my statement, Diana's report, Detective Monroe's timeline, evidence stacked neatly, relentless. When the first piece of footage appeared on the screen, the courtroom's atmosphere changed. Even people here for other cases stopped shuffling papers and watched. There was our living room, familiar and alien on the screen. My mother in her chair, daylight pooling on the rug. Emma entered the frame. The prosecutor didn't narrate. They didn't need to. The footage did the talking. We watched her jerk the wheelchair, watched Mom's head snap forward, watched the careless shove. The room went very, very quiet. A second clip. Emma pinching Mom's arm hard enough to leave crescent marks. A third. Forcing pills into her mouth, hand clamped over her jaw. The images moved like a slow, methodical indictment. In my peripheral vision, I saw people shift. One woman in the back row covered her mouth. A man clenched his fists on his knees. My hands flattened on the table, palms sweating, fingers digging into the varnish. My breath came deliberately, evenly. I wouldn't look away. Not now. Not when she'd endured this in silence. The judge leaned slightly forward, eyes fixed on the screen. No expression. But her fingers stilled on her notepad. The defense objected once, thin, feeble, claiming context, claiming misinterpretation. The judge overruled without fuss. When the video stopped, the room remained quiet for a full 3 heartbeats. Then, Judge Nguyen spoke. Voice calm, even, but carrying a weight that left no space for doubt. "Play it again," she said. They did. No one moved. The camera captured every flinch of my mother's muscles, every twitch of pain, every casual cruelty from the woman whose job was to protect her. By the time the footage ended a second time, the air felt crowded with unspoken rage. The prosecutor rested his hand lightly on the desk, a signal that the evidence spoke for itself. Now it was time for people to speak. They called me first. I stood. My legs carried me with a steadiness I didn't feel. I walked to the witness box, placed my hand on the Bible, gave the oath. My voice didn't crack. I sat. The prosecutor asked simple questions. How long I'd been caring for my mother, the progression of her condition, the decision to hire outside help, the first signs something was wrong. They weren't asking for poetry. They were asking for facts. Still, every answer felt like swallowing glass. I described the bruises, the shifts in my mother's reactions. The first time her body recoiled when I reached for her hand. Not from me, from the idea of being touched. I talked about the cameras hidden in the house, about the gloves, about the missing meds. I kept my answers short, clean. Yes, ma'am. No, Sir? Correct. 3 months. 11 years. No embellishment. The truth didn't need it. Then defense had their turn. Emma's attorney approached with a careful expression, a mask of concern, tilted just so, designed for jurors and judges and headlines. He asked questions designed to poke holes. You've been under extreme stress, haven't you, Ms. Collins? You work as a social worker, is that right? You've been caring for your mother almost alone for over a decade? Is it possible your exhaustion affected your judgment? He framed them like concern. I recognized the structure. Blame disguised as sympathy. My spine straightened. My jaw locked. Yes, I've been exhausted, I said. Yes, I've sacrificed. Yes, I've made mistakes. I took a breath, let it settle. But I did not bruise my mother, I continued, voice steady. And I did not plant those cameras. A flicker crossed his face. Something in the room solidified, a shift in attention. People weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at me. He changed tactics. Would you say you're controlling, Ms. Collins? A small, incredulous laugh almost escaped me. Controlling. As if protecting someone you love after they've lost control over their own body is a flaw. I would say, I answered carefully, that I take my mother's safety seriously. He pressed. Do you struggle to let others help? Yes, I said, and I hired Emma anyway. The prosecutor objected to the implication. Sustained. The attorney stepped back, pivoted. Is it possible that what we saw in those videos was rough care, not abuse? I didn't flinch. You saw the tape, I said. If that was your mother, would you call it care? He didn't answer. He couldn't. He sat down. Brian's name was called next. He walked to the stand with stiff shoulders, adjusting his tie like armor. He swore in, sat, then looked straight at the judge, not at me, not at Emma, not at our mother's name on the file. The prosecutor asked about his involvement, how often he visited, how much he contributed financially, what he observed. The answers were thin. Sometimes, when I could, not much. A hollow echo of commitment. Then Emma's attorney took his turn. He guided Brian carefully, like a man coaxing a performance from a willing actor. Mr. Collins, would you say your sister is intense? Brian hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Driven? Controlling? Fixated on doing everything herself? Yes. Did you ever feel she pushed away offers of help? He glanced at me once, quick, guilty, then said, yes. Do you think her obsession with being your mother's caretaker might have blinded her to what others were doing? The question hung in the air like poison mist. A beat, then, yes. There it was. The betrayal slipped in 3 letters. Something inside my chest went quiet. Not broken, quiet. The kind of quiet that precedes a decision. The defense sat, satisfied. The judge studied Brian for a long moment, then turned to the prosecution. Redirect? They declined. It was enough. Closing arguments came and went in a blur of structured anger and carefully worded condemnation. The prosecutor spoke of duty, vulnerability, trust betrayed. The defense clung to shadows, fatigue, confusion, interpretation. I barely heard them. What I heard, loud and clear, was the sound of my own heart slowing to a controlled, disciplined beat. When the judge finally spoke, the room settled into a reverent hush. She took her time, flipping through pages, letting the silence lengthen. It wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. When she lifted her gaze, she didn't look at the attorneys. She looked at Emma. The court has reviewed the evidence, she said, voice steady as a metronome. The footage, the medical reports, the testimony. Each word landed like a measured strike. What I saw, she continued, was not rough care. It was not the result of stress. It was not a misunderstanding. She paused. The room held its breath. It was abuse. A faint murmur rippled through the benches behind us. Miss Powers, Judge Nguyen said, eyes level, you violated the duty placed in your hands. You inflicted pain on someone who could not speak. You chose cruelty where mercy was not just expected, but required. Emma's mask slipped, just slightly. Her jaw clenched. The judge turned her attention to me. Ms. Collins, she said, this court recognizes the extraordinary burden you have carried for over a decade. It also recognizes that you sought help, trusted professionals, and acted decisively when you discovered harm. A warmth rose to my face. Shame wanted to interrupt, tell her about the signs I'd missed, the moments I'd doubted myself. But I held her gaze. You are not at fault, she said simply. You are the reason your mother is safe today. The words sank into me like water into cracked earth. Not at fault. Safe. The court orders full guardianship to remain with Ashley Collins, Judge Nguyen continued. Restitution to cover medical costs incurred as a result of the abuse. Agency review for all personnel associated with Ms. Powers' assignments. She turned back to Emma. And as for you, guilty on all counts. Sentencing to follow guideline recommendations for felony elder abuse, with aggravating circumstances. A bailiff stepped forward. The click of handcuffs sounded louder than any gavel. Emma didn't look at me as they led her away. I didn't need her to. This wasn't about her anymore. The judge wasn't finished. "Before we adjourn," she said, addressing the courtroom, "I want something understood. Caregiving is not a minor role. It is not a footnote. It is not invisible." Her gaze swept the benches, over nurses, family members, overworked daughters, and burnt-out sons who had drifted in from other cases. "It is a form of service," she said, "and no one who offers it in good faith should ever be shamed into silence when they ask for help, or when they demand justice." People shifted. Heads bowed. Eyes shone. Something in the room loosened. Then, unexpectedly, the judge stood. "So will everyone please rise," she said, "for Ms. Margaret Collins, and for the daughter who fought for her when she could not fight for herself." It wasn't protocol. It wasn't standard. But one by one, row by row, the entire courtroom stood. Lawyers, officers, clerks, strangers, even Brian. The air hummed with a quiet, collective acknowledgement. Not applause, not uproar, just a stand, firm, solemn, united. I remained seated for a second, overwhelmed, hands pressed to the table. Then I rose too. Not for myself, for the woman in the hospital bed whose name had finally been defended out loud. For 11 years, I had stood alone. Now, for the first time, the room stood with me. When the session adjourned, people began to filter out in low, murmured clusters. Papers slid into briefcases. Evidence boxes were carried away. The benches emptied. Brian approached slowly. No swagger this time. No rehearsed frustration. Just a man with shoulders slightly hunched, tie hanging lopsided. He stopped in front of me, hands twitching at his sides, searching for pockets, places to hide. I waited. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "I was wrong," he finally said. No excuses, no qualifiers. Just 3 words dragging centuries of male pride behind them. I watched his throat work as he swallowed. "I should have been here," he added. "I should have helped. Instead, I judged from a distance." Silence stretched. I let it. He took a breath. "I'm sorry." My heart tightened, not in forgiveness, not yet, but in recognition of something shifting. I nodded once. Boundaries didn't vanish because a judge spoke or a brother apologized. They didn't dissolve under a courtroom's fluorescent lights, but they could be redrawn. And I knew where mine would start. I picked up my file, the hospital bracelet glinting on my wrist. "I'm going back to Mom," I said. He nodded. "Can I?" "Not today," I replied. "Soon. When it's about her, not you." He flinched softly, then nodded again. This time the humility felt real. I walked out of the courtroom into crisp air that smelled faintly of rain and exhaust. My steps were steady, my spine tall, my hands no longer shaking. The battle inside this building was over. But healing wasn't a verdict. It was what came next. I headed toward the hospital, file under my arm, my mother's name still echoing in the courtroom I'd just left. The law had spoken. Now it was time for my heart to catch up. And for the first time in 11 years, I allowed myself to think of something other than survival. What does life look like after the fight is finally fair? The automatic doors of the hospital slid open with a sigh, as if the building itself understood the weight of the day and tried to soften it for me. Evening light filtered through the glass, turning the lobby gold and muted, like a world caught in the moment between lightning and thunder. I walked to the elevator with slow, measured steps. My heels clicked softly against the linoleum. each sound steadier than the last, the kind of steadiness earned only after truth is dragged, bleeding, into the light. On the ride up, I leaned my head against the cool metal wall. The echo of the courtroom lingered, the judge's voice, the footage, the collective rise of strangers. My body ached with the residue of adrenaline, but something inside me had unclenched. Not peace, not yet, but the first breath after a long, suffocating dive. The elevator chimed. I stepped out. A nurse rounded the corner pushing a cart of fresh linens. We made eye contact. She nodded, subtle, gentle, an acknowledgement of someone who knew exactly what had been risked today. I pushed open my mother's door. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the monitor and the faint orange wash of sunset pouring across the floor. Mom lay propped slightly higher than before, a nurse having adjusted her position. The bruises on her arm had darkened into deep violet, shifting toward that familiar murky green of wounds beginning to heal. I moved toward her slowly, carefully, as if each step needed its own permission. Her eyes fluttered open, not fully aware, but enough to find me. I sat beside her and rested my palm gently against her forearm. Her skin was warm. Warm meant here. Warm meant alive. My breath shook once, quiet, controlled, but real. "I'm back," I whispered. Her fingers twitched, as if trying to respond. A small movement, barely perceptible, yet enormous. I let my forehead rest lightly against the edge of her pillow, my hand still anchored to her arm. Today had dragged us through something sharp, merciless. But tonight she wasn't alone in that room, and neither was I. The nurse came in softly, adjusting the lights, checking the IV pump. She didn't interrupt. She moved with the kind of respect that didn't need words. Before leaving, she set a fresh hospital bracelet on the counter, the new one they'd place on Mom tomorrow when she transferred to a safer ward. Her hand lingered on my shoulder for a second. "She's lucky to have you," she murmured. I didn't look up. Didn't break the moment between Mom and me. But my chest warmed in a way it hadn't since before Emma entered our lives. Hours passed without much movement. Occasionally, the monitor beeped a little faster. Occasionally, a nurse stepped in to adjust something. But mostly it was just us. Breath and breath. Memory and quiet. At one point, I pulled out my folder, stack of documents from the case, notes from Monroe, new care plans from the hospital. A life rebuilt through paperwork. I organized it all methodically, movements slow enough not to disturb Mom. Every action felt like stitching something back together. One paper, one binder clip, one carefully aligned edge at a time. A soft knock. The door cracked open. Brian. He stood there holding a small bag from the gift shop. His tie was gone, sleeves rolled up, shoulders slumped in a way that made him look smaller than he had in years. He didn't enter right away. He hovered, almost waiting for an invitation he knew he hadn't earned. I nodded once. He stepped inside. His gaze landed on Mom first. It softened, unexpectedly, painfully, and he let out a breath that seemed to collapse 10 years of stubbornness. He moved toward her bed slowly, like someone approaching a fragile truth. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, head bowed. After a full minute, he set the gift bag quietly on the bedside table. A soft lavender blanket and a small stuffed bear with a heart on it. More for guilt than comfort, maybe, but it was something. He looked at me. Not defensive, not angry, just human. "I'm trying," he said softly. His voice trembled on the last word. I studied his face, not to punish, not to excuse, but to see if the sincerity was real. It was. I nodded again. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a door cracked open. A chance. "That's enough for tonight," I murmured. He swallowed and nodded. "I'll come back tomorrow, if that's okay." I gave the smallest nod. He left with quiet steps, closing the door with the gentlest click I'd ever heard from him. The room settled again. I pulled the new lavender blanket from the bag and draped it over Mom's legs. She relaxed, just slightly, into its warmth. I smoothed the fabric, letting the soft fibers brush under my fingers. Lavender. Her favorite scent before the stroke. Something warm blooming beneath the clinical smell of hospital air. I sat back down. The clock on the wall ticked in long, steady breaths. Outside, the sky deepened into twilight blue, the color of tired hope. I leaned closer to Mom. "I'm going to fight for you," I whispered. "But after this, I think we're going to learn how to breathe again. Both of us." Her eyelids fluttered. A small exhale escaped her lips. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe she was hearing every word. At nearly 9 p.m., Detective Monroe appeared in the doorway, her coat slung over her arm, hair pulled back like she was holding herself together with the last bit of discipline she had left. She stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. Her voice was low. "Sentencing hearing is scheduled. Agency review has begun. Powers will remain in custody." I nodded. She hesitated, unusual for her. Then she added, "You did everything right today." Everything right. The words hit somewhere tender, somewhere still raw from years of trying to be enough and failing myself anyway. I exhaled slowly. "Thank you," I murmured. She squeezed my shoulder once, then left, steps fading down the hall. Later, when the nurses dimmed the lights and the hallway settled into nighttime quiet, I rested my head on the side of Mom's bed, fingers intertwined with hers. Her pulse tapped gently against my palm, small but steady, like a distant drum calling us both forward. The storm had passed. Not the grief, not the healing, not the long road toward reclaiming a life that had been taken inch by inch. But the storm that mattered, the one that hid behind silence and bruises and guilt, that one was fading. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow would bring therapy appointments, guardianship paperwork, maybe even apologies from people who didn't deserve them. But tonight was ours. A quiet, fragile peace, the kind that comes when truth has finally finished screaming. I lifted my mother's hand gently, pressed it to my cheek, and let a single breath leave my chest. "We're still here." Her fingers twitched once, a heartbeat responding to a heartbeat, and the night held us both. Morning broke softly across the hospital windows, pale gold sliding over the rooftops, catching on the metal rails of Mom's bed, warming her skin before she woke. I'd spent the night in the chair, curled under the lavender blanket Brian brought, one hand still wrapped around hers. For the first time in months, she slept peacefully. Not guarded, not tense, not shrinking from phantom hands, just peaceful. I stood and stretched, muscles complaining like rusted hinges. I opened the blinds a little more. Light spilled into the room, illuminating the bruises that were slowly fading, the IV line that kept her hydrated, the soft rise and fall of her chest. Behind the bed, the window reflected us, her lying still, me standing tall behind her. A picture of survival. Not pretty, not heroic, but real. I let that reflection stay with me. 2 weeks later, life began reshaping itself, not around fear, but around healing. I packed up the old house, moving Mom into a new apartment with in-home nursing from a vetted agency. The old living room, the scene of so much quiet cruelty, became a battlefield I no longer needed to guard. I boxed up memories, photographs, blankets, the soft sweater she used to love before the stroke. When we left, I locked the door and placed the key gently into an envelope. That chapter wasn't home anymore. It was evidence. It was gone. Our new apartment smelled like fresh paint and citrus cleaner. Mom's wheelchair glided across smooth floors instead of catching on rough carpet. Her new caregiver, Rosa, moved with the grace of someone who understood dignity, not as a skill, but as a language. She talked to Mom, sang while she prepared meals, smoothed her hair with tenderness that wasn't performative, wasn't conditional. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, Mom began responding. A blink that lingered longer, a hand that curled around mine, a tear that rolled when I read to her from her favorite poetry book. Healing has a quiet sound when it arrives. At the support group for caregivers, I sat in a circle with women and men whose faces carried the unmistakable mixture of love and exhaustion. Some cried. Some whispered confessions they'd never told anyone. Some simply stared at the floor, holding their grief like something fragile. When it was my turn, I didn't rehearse anything. I took a breath. My mother survived something I didn't see, I said, and part of me hated myself for that. A couple heads lifted. Eyes met mine. But I'm learning that love isn't about being perfect, I continued. It's about showing up again after the worst has happened. It's about protecting someone even when the world tells you you've already lost. Someone murmured, yes. Someone else nodded. The room softened. I finished with a simple truth. I'm here because I kept quiet for too long. I won't make that mistake again. When the meeting ended, people lined up to hug me or squeeze my hand. Not pity, recognition. Pain recognizes pain. Strength recognizes strength. Brian visited more often than I expected. At first, he lingered by the door, hesitant, uncomfortable in the presence of consequences he'd never wanted to face. But over time, he tried. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes flowers. Sometimes he just sat beside Mom and held her hand with trembling fingers. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't try to rewrite the past. He just showed up. And showing up isn't redemption, but it's a beginning. One afternoon, he helped me assemble a new bookshelf, fumbling with screws, cursing under his breath. I bit back a smile. When he finished, he stood back, wiped sweat from his brow, and said, I'm not good at this. I looked at him carefully. No one is, I said. Not at first. He nodded, eyes damp, and accepted that mercy without question. We weren't healed, but the ground between us wasn't cracked anymore, just unsettled earth, ready for planting. A few days later, a package arrived from the courthouse, official closure, case documents, sentencing, evidence release forms, and Judge Nguyen's handwritten note. Justice protects the vulnerable. Your courage protected her first. I held the card against my chest for a moment, letting the words settle where the guilt had lived for too long. Then I placed it in Mom's keepsake drawer, next to her hospital bracelet, and a family photo I nearly threw away but didn't. I'm glad I kept it. Healing isn't erasing the past. It's learning how to carry it differently. One evening, as the sky turned violet and the city lights blinked awake, I sat at our kitchen table sorting old photographs, the ones that survived the purge of the old house. Mom in her garden, Mom reading in her armchair, Mom dancing with Dad at a long-ago wedding, Mom holding me as a baby, eyes bright with some future she couldn't yet see. I held one photo longer than the others. Mom standing at the beach, arms outstretched to the wind, hair wild and laughter mid-escape. Freedom, joy, strength. Not a victim. Never a victim. I set the photo on the table and whispered to the air. I'm giving it all back to you, Mom. Every piece, every bit that was taken. A breeze slipped through the open window, rustling the edges of the photographs. Something in me loosened. Before bed, I wheeled Mom onto the balcony where the night air smelled of jasmine and distant rain. A blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. I sat beside her. Under the glow of the porch light, her hand slid across the armrest, slow and deliberate, until her fingers brushed the back of mine. A small motion,
A quiet miracle. I intertwined my fingers with hers. The city hummed below, alive with strangers carrying their own secrets, their own brokenness, their own hope. I leaned closer, speaking softly, the way she used to speak to me when I woke from childhood nightmares. "Mom," I murmured. "We made it. Not untouched, not unscarred, but we made it." A tear slipped down her cheek. I wiped it gently. She wasn't crying from pain. I knew the difference.
This one was something else. Recognition, release, relief. I kissed her temple. "Some battles aren't chosen," I whispered, "but survival is always earned." Her fingers squeezed mine, small, soft, unmistakable. And in that moment, sitting beneath the quiet halo of porch light, I understood something I'd been chasing for 11 years. Love isn't meant to be martyrdom. Love is protection. Love is truth. Love is choosing peace, even when the world demands suffering. And for the first time, peace didn't feel like surrender. It felt like victory. A quiet one. A dignified one. One my mother could finally rest inside. I held her hand as the night deepened around us, warm and steady. We were still here. And that was enough. If you've ever sacrificed for family only to face betrayal, subscribe for true stories about enduring strength, justice, and healing after silence.